Jasmine's hands trembled as she balanced the tray of wine bottles, each one worth more than her monthly rent. The crystal glasses caught the low amber light of Lumiere, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, casting fractured rainbows across the white tablecloth. She'd worked here for 4 months, and she still wasn't used to the weight of silence that fell when certain men entered the private dining room. Tonight, that silence was suffocating. The table of 9 men in tailored suits radiated danger the way summer asphalt radiated heat, invisible but impossible to ignore. Their leader sat at the head of the table, and Jasmine had learned through 4 months of careful invisibility not to look directly at him, but she felt his presence like a physical thing, pulling at her awareness even as she focused on pouring wine with hands that refused to steady. Dante Ricci. She'd heard the whispered name, seen the way the restaurant owner practically bowed when he arrived, noticed how conversations died and resumed in his wake like waves around a stone. At 34, he wore power like other men wore cologne, subtle but unmistakable. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins, sharp jaw, aristocratic nose, and eyes the color of smoke that seemed to calculate the value of everything they touched. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, and she could see the edge of a tattoo creeping up his neck from beneath his crisp white collar. Jasmine told herself to stay invisible, pour the wine, disappear. It was a skill she'd perfected over 3 years of hiding, the art of being present but unremarkable, of moving through spaces without leaving an impression. But invisibility, she'd learned, was a luxury black women couldn't always afford. At 28, she'd rebuilt herself from ashes. Her natural hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that had taken 30 minutes to perfect, her makeup minimal, her black uniform pressed until the creases were sharp enough to cut. The small gold hoops in her ears, a gift from her grandmother before everything fell apart, were the only jewelry she allowed herself. Simple, professional, forgettable. Table 9 needs their wine, Jasmine. Marcus, the head waiter, materialized beside her, his voice tight with anxiety. Don't mess this up. Those men. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Jasmine lifted the tray, 3 bottles of Chateau Margaux that probably cost more than her college tuition had, and moved toward the private dining room, her reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling windows. A slender woman with warm brown skin that glowed under the restaurant's carefully designed lighting, dark eyes that had learned to reveal nothing, and a posture that projected competence she didn't always feel. The room fell silent when she entered. 9 pairs of eyes tracked her movement with the coordinated precision of predators. 8 men sat around an oval table set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum, but Jasmine's attention fixed, despite her best efforts, on the man at the head. Dante Ricci looked at her the way art collectors looked at paintings, with focused intensity that stripped away pretense and saw what lay beneath. His gaze moved from her face to her hands to the wine she carried, cataloging details most people would miss. "Good evening, gentlemen," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady through sheer force of will. She'd learned in her old life, the one she'd fled 3 years ago, that confidence was a performance, and she'd gotten very good at performing. She began pouring, starting with the man on Dante's right. He had cold eyes and a mouth that curved in a way that made her skin crawl. When her hand came near his glass, he deliberately moved it, forcing her to lean closer. "Careful, sweetheart," he said in English, his accent thick with Italian inflection. "We wouldn't want you spilling on expensive suits." "Of course not, sir." Jasmine completed the pour and moved to the next guest, feeling the weight of their assessment. She'd endured this before. Powerful men looking at women they considered beneath them, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push. She'd survived worse. She would survive this. When she reached Dante, she found his eyes already on her, not assessing like the others, studying, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, a language he was learning to read. She poured his wine with hands that steadied through sheer determination, the Bordeaux filling his glass in a perfect arc that would have made her old sommelier instructor proud. When she stepped back, ready to disappear into the walls like she'd trained herself to do, Dante spoke. The words were Arabic, flawless and fluid. the accent placing him as someone who'd spent significant time in the Middle East. "Do you think she understands what we're saying?" The table erupted in laughter. They thought they were invisible, speaking in a language no American waitress would comprehend. But Jasmine's blood turned to ice. The man with the cruel mouth, the one who'd made her lean close, answered in Arabic, his eyes raking over her with an expression that made her stomach turn. "Of course not. She's just another server. Maybe we should have some fun with her after dessert." The words hit her like a slap across the face. For 3 years, Jasmine had let people underestimate her, had hidden every part of herself that might draw attention, her education, her languages, her past. She'd learned to swallow insults, to smile through condescension, to make herself so small that danger couldn't find her. But there were lines she wouldn't let anyone cross. Not anymore, not even to stay safe. Her mouth opened before her brain could stop it, before 3 years of careful invisibility could silence her, before survival instinct could override fury. "Ana afam kul kalima." The Arabic emerged crisp and cultured, her accent unmistakably that of someone who'd studied formally, who'd lived abroad, who'd used the language professionally. "I understand every word." The silence was absolute. Every man at the table froze. The cruel-mouthed one's smirk vanished like smoke. Across the table, someone's wineglass trembled against china, but Jasmine's eyes were locked on Dante Ricci, watching shock ripple across features that probably rarely revealed anything. His eyes widened fractionally. Surprise. Then calculation. Then something that looked almost like respect. She saw his mind working, reassessing everything about her in the space of a heartbeat. The intelligence in those smoke-colored eyes was almost frightening in its intensity. "Aina ta'lamti al-Arabia." His voice had changed, dropped lower, become somehow more dangerous even as it softened. "Where did you learn Arabic?" Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd revealed too much, broken the cardinal rule of staying hidden. But she couldn't take it back now, and some part of her, the part that had once believed in justice, in speaking truth to power, in being more than invisible, didn't want to. "Beirut." The word came out steady, despite the fear flooding her veins. "I lived there for 3 years. And in Amman, before that." One of the other men started to speak. But Dante raised a single finger. The man fell silent instantly, and Jasmine understood in that moment exactly how much power Dante Ricci wielded. Not through volume or violence, but through absolute authority that didn't need to be questioned. His attention never left her face. "Ma kuntilina hunaka?" What were you doing there? This was dangerous territory. The truth was complicated, tangled with the life she'd fled, the identity she'd abandoned, the people who would kill her if they found her. But something in his eyes told her that lies wouldn't work. He'd spot them in an instant. "Li mutarjim." Her voice was quiet but clear. "I was a translator for the United Nations." She watched the information land, saw him process the implications, that she wasn't just fluent, but professionally trained, that she'd held a position requiring security clearance and specialized skills, that everything about her carefully constructed persona as just a waitress was a lie built on necessity and fear. Dante leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that unnerving intensity. Then, to her complete shock, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Something that might have been amusement mixed with intrigue. "What's your name?" he asked in English now, his voice carrying a warmth that made the question feel intimate despite the audience. "Jasmine." She forced the word past suddenly dry lips, her heart still racing, her mind screaming that she'd just destroyed 3 years of careful hiding in 30 seconds of anger. "Jasmine Carter." "Jasmine." He repeated it like he was tasting the syllables, testing how they felt in his mouth. "Sit down." She blinked. "Sir, I'm working. Not anymore." He gestured to an empty chair with the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no. "Tonight, you're my guest." "Mr. Ricci, I can't." "Dante." His eyes held hers, smoke-colored and intense and seeing far too much. "And you can." He pulled out his phone without looking away from her, pressed a single button. Marcus. Jasmine will be joining us for dinner. Have someone cover her tables. Yes, Mr. Ricci, right away, sir. Marcus's voice came through tinny but immediate, and Jasmine could hear the panic beneath his professional tone. Dante ended the call and set his phone on the table, still watching her with that focused intensity that made her feel stripped bare. Please, Jasmine. Sit. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to protect the small, safe life she'd built from the wreckage of her old one. But Dante Ricci wasn't asking. Men like him didn't ask. They commanded, they expected, they took. And standing there in her waitress uniform with 9 of New York's most dangerous men watching her, Jasmine realized she had a choice: keep hiding and hope they forgot about her, or sit down and face whatever came next. She sat. The meal that followed felt surreal, like she'd stepped through a mirror into someone else's life. Dante kept switching between Arabic and English, asking her questions about Beirut, about Aman, about her work with the UN. She answered carefully, revealing enough to satisfy his curiosity, but not enough to expose the full truth of why she'd fled. She didn't mention the death threats, didn't mention the corruption she'd witnessed, the documents she'd translated that had made her a target, the fact that Jasmine Carter was a name she'd adopted when Jasmine al-Rashid had become too dangerous to keep. But watching the intelligence in Dante's smoke-colored eyes, seeing how he listened not just to her words, but to everything she didn't say, Jasmine suspected he heard it all anyway. The truth she'd buried, the fear she carried, the secrets that would get her killed if the wrong people ever found her. And as the evening wore on, and Dante Ricci looked at her with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in 3 years, Jasmine realized that invisibility was no longer an option. The question was, what would he do with everything he'd just learned? The meal stretched into hours. Dante ordered dishes Jasmine had only served, never tasted: handmade pasta with black truffles, aged beef that melted on the tongue, desserts that looked like edible art. He insisted she try everything, watching with that focused intensity as she took her first bite of food that cost more than her weekly paycheck. "Tell me about Beirut," he said, switching to Arabic again. The other men had resumed their own conversations in Italian, but Jasmine felt their attention tracking her like radar. "It's beautiful," she said carefully, "complicated, ancient and modern existing in the same breath." "That's not what I asked." Dante's voice was soft but relentless. "I asked about you in Beirut. What brought you there?" Jasmine set down her fork, the food suddenly tasteless. "A fellowship. The UN recruited me straight out of my master's program, Arabic and International Relations." "Where?" "Georgetown." His eyebrows lifted fractionally. "Impressive. You must have been very good." "I was." The past tense hurt more than she expected. "Until I wasn't." "What happened?" The question she'd been dreading. Jasmine looked at this dangerous man across from her, at the intelligence in his smoke-colored eyes, at the way he listened not just to words, but to silence. She thought about lying, about deflecting, about all the survival skills she'd honed over 3 years. Instead, she told him the truth, or part of it. "I translated documents I shouldn't have seen, found evidence of corruption at levels that made people very nervous when I tried to report it through proper channels." She stopped, the memory of her supervisor's death still sharp after 3 years. People started dying. Car accidents, sudden illnesses. I got smart and disappeared before I became another tragic coincidence. Dante's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a familiar pattern. Who were they? His voice had gone cold, dangerous. "The people who threatened you." "Does it matter?" "They're powerful enough that Jasmine al-Rashid had to die so Jasmine Carter could survive." The name landed between them like a stone in still water. She watched Dante process it. The Arabic surname, the implication of identity erasure, the level of threat that required becoming someone else entirely. "Al-Rashid," he repeated softly. "Your real name." Was. 3 years ago. Jasmine met his eyes. Now I'm just a waitress who should have kept her mouth shut. No. Dante leaned forward, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker, more complex. Now you're a brilliant woman who refused to let disrespect pass unchallenged. There's a difference. A difference that might get me killed. Not while you're under my protection. The words hung in the air between them. Jasmine stared at him, trying to process what he'd just offered. Protection from a mafia boss. Safety purchased with allegiance to a man who operated outside every law she'd once sworn to uphold. I don't need your protection, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. My capo made threats in Arabic because he thought you wouldn't understand. He thought you were powerless. Dante's voice was quiet steel. By tomorrow, half of New York's underworld will know there's a waitress at Lumiere who speaks fluent Arabic and has UN connections. How long do you think it takes for word to reach the people you're hiding from? Ice flooded Jasmine's veins. She hadn't thought of that. Hadn't considered how quickly information traveled in circles where knowledge was currency. I'll quit. Move again. I've done it before. Running isn't a solution. It's a delay. Dante's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid, and surprisingly gentle. I'm offering you something better. Safety. Resources. A chance to stop looking over your shoulder. In exchange for what? Jasmine pulled her hand away, refusing to let his touch distract her from the reality of what he was proposing. Men like you don't give without taking. Men like me. His smile was thin, humorless. You mean criminals. I mean dangerous. I am dangerous, Jasmine, but not to you. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and set it between them. This is my private number. Very few people have it. I'm giving it to you because I think you're in more trouble than you realize, and I think I can help. Why? The question came out as a whisper. You don't know me. Why would you care what happens to a waitress you met 3 hours ago? Dante was quiet for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something vulnerable beneath the armor of power he wore. My mother was a translator, he said finally, his voice rough with old pain. She spoke 6 languages, brilliant woman who could have worked anywhere, done anything. But she married my father and spent 20 years translating for his business dealings. Never getting credit, always in the background. He looked at Jasmine with an intensity that made her breath catch. She died when I was 15. Heart attack, they said. But I always wondered if the stress of living in that world, of knowing too much and saying too little, if that's what really killed her. His jaw tightened. When I heard you speak Arabic tonight, when I saw the intelligence in your eyes and the fear you're trying to hide, I saw her, and I thought, not this time. Not while I'm watching. Jasmine's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. She'd spent 3 years alone, trusting no one, certain that revealing herself meant death. But Dante Ricci, dangerous, powerful, criminal, was offering her something she'd thought she'd lost forever. The possibility of being seen, of being protected, of mattering to someone. I need to think about it, she said quietly. Take all the time you need. Dante stood, signaling the end of the evening. But Jasmine? Starting tomorrow, you'll have 2 of my men following you, not close enough to intrude, but close enough to keep you safe. You can accept my help voluntarily, or you can let me protect you anyway. Your choice. He pulled out his wallet, left a stack of bills on the table that would cover her rent for 2 months. Your tips for the evening. And Jasmine? He paused at the door, looking back at her with those smoke-colored eyes that saw too much. Don't quit Lumiere. Running only works if they're not already looking for you. Then he was gone, taking his men and the strange electricity of his presence with him, leaving Jasmine alone at a table covered in the remnants of the most expensive meal she'd ever eaten and the most dangerous conversation she'd ever had. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Sleep well, Jasmine. You're safe tonight. D. She stared at the message, her hands trembling again, but for different reasons now. not fear, something far more complicated. Dante Ricci had seen her, really seen her, and instead of turning away, he'd stepped closer, offered protection she desperately needed from a man she barely knew. The question was, could she trust him? Or was she about to make the second biggest mistake of her life? The first had been speaking Arabic. But as Jasmine left Lumiere that night, the weight of Dante's protection settling around her like an invisible cloak, she couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, that mistake might save her life. 5 days passed in a strange new rhythm. Jasmine worked her shifts at Lumiere, hyper-aware of the two men who followed at a discreet distance, never intrusive, never obvious, but always there. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other lean and watchful. Both moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers. Dante called every night at exactly 9:30 p.m. Sometimes they talked for hours, about books, about music, about the complicated ethics of power and protection. Sometimes just for minutes, his voice a low rumble asking if she was safe, if she needed anything, if she'd eaten. She should have found it suffocating. Instead, she found herself waiting for those calls, her phone clutched in her hand at 9:29, pulse quickening when it rang. "You don't have to check on me every night," she said on the fourth evening, curled up on her second-hand couch in the tiny Queen studio that suddenly felt smaller, shabbier, more temporary than ever. "I know." There was a smile in his voice. "I want to. There's a difference." "Dante? Have dinner with me tomorrow. My place. I'll cook." Jasmine's breath caught. Dinner at a restaurant was one thing. Dinner at his home was something else entirely. Intimate, personal, crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" His voice was gentle, coaxing. "Are you afraid of me, Jasmine?" "I'm afraid of what you represent, of getting pulled into a world I swore I'd never be part of." "You're already in that world, Habibti." The Arabic endearment rolled off his tongue like honey. "You've been in it since the moment you witnessed corruption and refused to stay silent. The only question is whether you face it alone or with someone beside you." The worst part was that he was right. She'd been running for 3 years from people who operated outside the law, who killed to protect their secrets. Dante might be a criminal, but at least he was honest about what he was. "What time?" she heard herself ask. 7. I'll send a car." That Saturday evening, Jasmine stood in front of her closet in her underwear, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed inadequate. Everything she owned was practical. Black pants for work, jeans for days off, a single dress she'd bought at a thrift store and never worn. She chose the dress. It was deep emerald green, simple but elegant, hitting just above her knees. She let her natural curls loose around her shoulders. Applied makeup with a shaking hand, highlighting the warm brown of her skin, the dark eyes that had seen too much. The car arrived at 6:55 p.m. The driver was the tall, broad-shouldered guard who'd been following her all week. He opened the door without speaking, but she caught the hint of approval in his eyes when he saw her. Dante's penthouse occupied the top floor of a glass tower in Tribeca. When the elevator doors opened directly into his home, Jasmine stepped into a space that stole her breath, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, modern furniture in grays and blacks, and art on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. But what struck her most was how quiet it was. Not empty, lived in, with books stacked on tables and a coffee cup left on the kitchen counter, but peaceful in a way that felt like sanctuary. "You came." Dante appeared from the kitchen, and Jasmine's mouth went dry. He wore dark jeans and a simple black Henley that showed the full extent of his tattoos, not just the one on his neck, but intricate Arabic calligraphy running down both forearms. Without the armor of his suits, he looked younger, more approachable, somehow more dangerous. "You didn't really give me a choice," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's always a choice." He moved closer, and she caught his scent, cedar cologne and something uniquely him. "But I'm glad you chose this." He'd cooked Mediterranean, hummus and tabbouleh, grilled lamb with za'atar, warm pita bread that filled the apartment with the scent of home. They ate on his balcony as the sun set over the river, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Your mother's recipes?" Jasmine asked, tasting the lamb. "Some of them." Dante's voice softened. "She taught me that a man who can't feed himself is a man who can't survive. I was 12 when she died. This was one of the last meals we cooked together." "I'm sorry." Jasmine reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Losing a parent that young shapes you." His fingers intertwined with hers. "Makes you realize that safety is an illusion, and the only thing you can control is how you protect the people you love." They held each other's gaze, and something shifted in the air between them. Recognition of shared loss, shared understanding that the world was crueler than it should be. The moment shattered when Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went cold, dangerous in a way that made Jasmine's pulse spike. "What is it?" "Someone's been asking questions about you." His voice was controlled steel. "A diplomat. Russian. Name Alexei Volkov." Ice flooded Jasmine's veins. The plate in front of her blurred as 3 years of carefully buried terror came rushing back. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. "Because he walked into Lumiere tonight asking the staff about a waitress who speaks Arabic and used to work for the UN. Dante's jaw tightened. "My people stalled him. But Jasmine—" He moved around the table, crouching beside her chair, his hands gentle on her face. "Who is he?" "Cultural attaché to the Russian consulate." The words came out mechanical, distant. "And the man who threatened to kill me 3 years ago when I translated documents proving he was trafficking weapons." Dante's eyes went black with fury. "He's the one you ran from?" "One of them. There were others. But Alexei—" Her voice broke. "He killed my supervisor when she tried to help me, made it look like a car accident. He told me I'd be next if I didn't disappear. And now he's found you." Dante pulled her into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Jasmine, listen to me. He won't touch you. I won't let him." "You don't understand who these people are, what they're capable of." "I understand perfectly." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "They're powerful men who use diplomatic immunity as cover for crimes. They rely on fear and secrecy. But they've never dealt with me before." "Dante, you can't just—" "I can, and I will." His voice was absolute. "You're under my protection now. That means Alexei Volkov just declared war on the Ricci family. And that's a war he's going to lose." Jasmine wanted to argue, to tell him this wasn't his fight, that she'd survived 3 years on her own. But the truth was, she was tired. So tired of running, of fear, of being alone. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "First, you're staying here tonight. This penthouse has security even the FBI envies." He stood, pulling out his phone. "Second, I'm calling everyone I know who owes me favors. By tomorrow, I'll have everything on Alexei Volkov. His financials, his contacts, his secrets. And then—" His smile was cold and sharp. "We're going to make sure he understands what happens when you threaten what's mine." "I'm not yours," Jasmine whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "Aren't you?" Dante's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Tell me you don't feel this between us. Tell me your heart doesn't race when I touch you. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you." Jasmine's heart was thundering now, so loud she was certain he could hear it. She thought about the past 5 days, the calls, the protection, the way he looked at her like she was something precious instead of problematic. "This is crazy," she breathed. "We barely know each other." "I know enough." His forehead touched hers. "I know you're brave and brilliant. I know you've survived things that would break most people. I know that when you speak Arabic, my whole world stops." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And I know that I'm falling for you, Jasmine. Fast and hard and completely." She should pull away, should protect her heart the way she'd learned to protect everything else. But standing in Dante Ricci's arms with her past closing in and his protection wrapping around her, Jasmine realized she was tired of protecting herself from everything, including the possibility of being happy. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." His lips brushed her forehead. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." And when he kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, hungrier, Jasmine let herself fall into the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being truly seen for the first time in 3 years. Outside the windows, the city glittered with a million lights. Inside, 2 people who'd learned to survive alone discovered what it meant to stand together. But Alexei Volkov was still out there, and the past, Jasmine knew, always collected its debts. Jasmine woke in Dante's guest room to the smell of fresh coffee and the muted sound of angry Italian coming from somewhere in the penthouse. She pulled on the robe he'd left for her, soft cashmere that smelled like his cologne, and followed the voices to his office. Dante stood behind a massive desk, covered in documents and photographs, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian that sounded like threats wrapped in silk. When he saw her in the doorway, his expression softened instantly. "Ti richiamo," he said into the phone, then ended the call. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in 3 years." It was true. Despite everything, she'd slept deeply, safely, for the first time since fleeing Beirut. "What did you find?" Dante gestured to the desk. "Everything. Alexei Volkov has been sloppy. Bank accounts that don't match his diplomatic salary, communications with known arms dealers, meetings he failed to log with the consulate." His smile was cold. "And most interestingly, he's in New York on an expired visa. His diplomatic credentials were revoked 2 months ago, but he never left." Which means he has no diplomatic immunity. He's just a criminal on borrowed time." Dante moved around the desk, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I've already contacted federal prosecutors I know. They're very interested in what you might testify about." Jasmine's stomach clenched. "Testify? Dante, if I go public—" "You'll be protected. FBI safe house. Witness protection if necessary. And—" He paused, his voice dropping. "Me. Always me." Before Jasmine could respond, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went dangerous. "What?" "Volkov just walked into Lumiere. He's asking to speak with you." Terror and fury warred in Jasmine's chest. After 3 years of hiding, Alexei had the audacity to walk into her workplace like he owned it. "I'm going there," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Absolutely not." "He knows where I work. He knows who I am. Running won't help." Jasmine met Dante's eyes. "But facing him with you beside me? That might?" Dante studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We go together. And Jasmine, trust me to handle this." They arrived at Lumiere an hour later. The restaurant was closed for lunch prep, but Alexei Volkov sat at a corner table like he'd been invited. He looked exactly as Jasmine remembered. Mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, and eyes that held all the warmth of a winter in Moscow. Jasmine al-Rashid. He smiled when he saw her, speaking in Russian. Or should I say Carter? Such a common American name for someone so uncommon. It's just Jasmine now. She forced herself to stay calm, feeling Dante's solid presence beside her. "What do you want, Alexei?" "To talk. About old times. About documents you translated that caused such unpleasantness." He switched to English, his accent thick. "About how we might resolve our past misunderstandings." "There's no misunderstanding," Jasmine said. "You trafficked weapons. I translated the proof. You killed my supervisor when she tried to report it." "Such accusations. And no proof." Alexei's smile widened. "Poor Maria. Such a tragic accident." Dante moved then, not loudly, not obviously. But suddenly he was between Jasmine and Alexei, his presence radiating controlled violence. "You're Alexei Volkov," Dante said quietly. "Former cultural attaché, currently wanted for questioning by the FBI, Interpol, and 3 other international agencies. And you just threatened a woman under my protection." Alexei's smile faltered. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Dante Ricci. And you're sitting in my restaurant, threatening my woman, which means you've made two very serious mistakes." "Your woman?" Alexei laughed, but it sounded forced. How charming. The waitress found herself a mob boss. This changes nothing. It changes everything. Dante pulled out his phone, made a call. "You can come in now." The restaurant doors opened. 3 men in FBI jackets entered, led by a woman with sharp eyes and federal credentials. "Alexei Volkov," she said, "you're under arrest for weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and violations of the Arms Export Control Act. You have the right to remain silent." Alexei's face went white as agents moved to handcuff him. He looked at Jasmine with pure hatred. "You think you've won?" "There are others. They'll find you." "No, they won't." Dante's voice was ice. "Because Jasmine's going to testify against every single one of them, and I'm going to make sure she's protected while she does it." As agents led Alexei away, Jasmine felt 3 years of fear finally begin to crack. She'd spent so long running, hiding, being invisible. But standing beside Dante Ricci, watching her nightmare be dragged away in handcuffs, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone anymore, and she didn't have to be afraid. Dante turned to her, his hand cupping her face. "Are you okay?" "I'm—" Jasmine laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I think I'm free. For the first time in 3 years, I'm actually free." "Not just free." Dante's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Safe, protected, mine." "Yours," she agreed, and kissed him right there in the empty restaurant, tasting like coffee and possibility, and the future she'd thought she'd lost. Outside, federal agents put Alexei Volkov in a car that would take him to a place where diplomatic games and murder disguised as accidents couldn't save him. And inside Lumiere, Jasmine Carter, formerly Jasmine al-Rashid, UN translator, fugitive, survivor, learned what it meant to stop running and start living. But her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because testimony meant going public, and going public meant others would come looking. The question was, would Dante's protection be enough when the full weight of her past came calling? 3 months later, Jasmine stood in a federal courthouse wearing a navy suit Dante had insisted on buying her. Her natural curls were pulled back in a professional bun, her makeup subtle, her hands surprisingly steady as she placed them on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." The courtroom was packed. Journalists, diplomats, law enforcement from 3 countries. But Jasmine's eyes found Dante in the gallery, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. He nodded once, and she felt courage flood through her. This wasn't just Alexei's trial. It was the case against 7 other officials she'd helped build over 3 months of testimony, documents, and memories she'd buried for years. "Miss al-Rashid," the prosecutor began, using her real name for the first time in public, "can you tell the court about the documents you translated in Beirut?" For 2 hours, Jasmine spoke. She detailed weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian aid, money laundering through diplomatic channels, the systematic corruption that had cost lives. And when the defense attorney tried to break her, tried to paint her as unreliable, Dante's eyes never left her face. She didn't break. She'd survived 3 years alone. Now, with protection and purpose, she was unshakable. When she stepped down, Dante was waiting outside the courtroom. He pulled her into his arms without a word, and Jasmine breathed him in, cedar cologne and safety and home. "Proud of you," he murmured against her hair. "So proud." "It's not over yet. The verdict will be guilty, all of them." His voice carried absolute certainty. "You gave them everything they needed." That evening, back at the penthouse that had become their home, Dante cooked dinner while Jasmine watched from the kitchen counter, sipping wine and feeling the weight of 3 years finally lifting. "What happens now?" she asked. "After the trial?" "You decide." Dante set down his knife, turning to face her. "The UN has offered to reinstate you. 3 translation firms want to hire you. You could go back to that world if you wanted." "What do you want?" I want you here." His voice was rough with honesty. "I want you in my life, in my home, in my bed. I want to wake up next to you and know you're safe and happy, but only if that's what you want." Jasmine's heart swelled with an emotion so big it almost hurt. She slid off the counter, crossed to him, her hands framing his face. "I spent 3 years being invisible, being afraid, being alone. You gave me my voice back, my name, my life." She kissed him softly. "I want you, Dante. All of you. For as long as you'll have me." "That might be forever," he warned, his smile devastating. "Good." Dante reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Jasmine's breath caught. "I was going to wait until after the verdict," he said, opening it to reveal a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "But I've never been patient about things I want, and I want you, Jasmine, as my wife, my partner, my equal in everything." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Dante, marry me. Let me protect you and cherish you and argue with you about stupid things for the rest of our lives. Let me give you the safety you deserve and the love you've earned." His voice went soft. "Please." "Yes." The word came out as a laugh mixed with tears. "Yes, absolutely, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, then kissed her with a passion that promised forever. And as the city glittered below them, Jasmine Carter, formerly Jasmine al-Rashid, UN translator, survivor, fighter, learned what it meant to stop merely surviving and start truly living. The verdict came 3 days later, guilty on all counts, 7 corrupt officials sentenced to decades in prison. Justice, delayed but delivered. And in a penthouse in Tribeca, a woman who'd spent 3 years hiding in plain sight prepared for her wedding to the most dangerous man in New York. The man who'd seen her when she was invisible, protected her when she was vulnerable, and loved her when she thought love was impossible. Dante Ricci had given her everything: safety, purpose, home. But most importantly, he'd given her the courage to reclaim herself. And Jasmine. She'd given him something equally precious: trust, love, and the knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else stand beside you. Together, they were unbreakable. Jasmine Ricci stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, watching Manhattan wake up beneath her. The sapphire on her left hand caught the morning light, and she smiled at the simple gold band beside it, her wedding ring, worn for 3 months now. Behind her, she heard Dante moving in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of him making coffee in the expensive machine he'd never quite mastered. Some things didn't change, even when everything else did. "Morning, Habibti." His arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How different my life is from a year ago." She leaned back against his chest. "I was invisible, afraid, alone. Now you're Jasmine Ricci, senior translator for the State Department, consultant to the FBI, and the woman who helped put 7 corrupt diplomats in prison." His voice carried pride and warmth. "And my wife. Don't forget that part." "How could I?" She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd changed everything. "You remind me every day." It was true. Dante had a habit of introducing her as "my brilliant wife" at every opportunity, speaking about her work with genuine admiration, treating her accomplishments as victories they shared. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from the State Department. "Translation request for the UN General Assembly. Are you available next month?" "They want me in Geneva," she said, showing him the message. "Then we'll go to Geneva." Dante kissed her forehead. "I've been meaning to check on our restaurant there anyway." "Our restaurant?" Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Since when do we have a restaurant in Geneva?" "Since last week. Surprise." His smile was unrepentant. "Thought you might want a home base when you travel for work, and I might have also bought an apartment nearby, just in case." Jasmine laughed, the sound free and genuine. "You can't just buy cities for me, Dante." "Watch me." He pulled her closer. "Besides, you gave me something far more valuable. You gave me yourself. Every city, every restaurant, every protection I can offer, It's not enough. It'll never be enough for what you've given me. And what's that? Purpose. His voice went soft. For years, I ran my family's empire, made money, wielded power. But it was empty. He cupped her face. You remind me every day that power should protect people, not just control them. That strength means standing beside someone, not above them. Jasmine kissed him, tasting coffee and promise and the future they were building together. Later that morning, she'd meet with federal prosecutors about another case. Tomorrow, she'd start preparing for Geneva. Next week, she'd testify again, using her voice to ensure that those who abused power faced consequences. But right now, wrapped in Dante's arms with Manhattan glittering below and her whole life ahead of her, Jasmine felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever in Beirut 3 years ago. Peace, safety, home. She was no longer the invisible waitress, hiding in plain sight. She was Jasmine Ricci, translator, advocate, survivor, wife. She spoke 6 languages, carried secrets that had toppled governments, and had married the most dangerous man in New York. And every single day, she chose courage over fear, truth over silence, love over safety. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't hide from danger. It's stand beside someone who sees you, really sees you, and build a life worth living. I love you, she whispered against Dante's lips. Ana uhibuki, he replied in perfect Arabic. I love you, from invisible to unbreakable, from afraid to free, from alone to beloved. Jasmine had finally come home.